Hello, my name is Sadie Otte. I'm one of the co-directors of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the Claremont Colleges. I will be giving the next installment in our Foundations of Inclusive Teaching series, and this one will be on assignments and assessments. There are a few characteristics of inclusive assignments that I'll be going over. I'm going to give a broad overview first and then go into some specifics. So first of all, cultural relevance. This can mean incorporating students' prior knowledge and lived experience. This is shown to improve educational equity. And so this might be difficult. For example, if you feel that students may not have a lot of knowledge in your subject area. I teach chemistry, organic chemistry. Students are not generally coming in with a lot of deep knowledge in that area. However, it's important to recognize that students do have other skills and other knowledge. And if you provide space and open up the class a bit, there can be ways for them to include those. So for example, even if students may not know about a lot about organic chemistry, they might have more knowledge than me in areas such as environmental initiatives that happened in their local hometown or things like that. So if there are ways to include space for students to bring those in, that can be really valuable. A second characteristic is what Robinson and Hobbes call utility value. This just means that there's some sort of motivation for students to learn about the subject beyond getting a grade, some sort of personal or professional value. Of course, we'd all like to think that students sign up for our classes because they have some sort of inherent interest in the topic, and this might be true most of the time, but there are also classes where students are trying to fulfill a major requirement or a general education requirement, or maybe it was the only class left at the schedule time that they needed to fill. And so in those cases, we might need to do a little more work to show students why our class has some sort of value to them and meaning for them. And anytime that we can do that will help increase the inclusiveness of our class. Particularly when it comes to assignments. Even if students have a inherent interest in the subject area and are excited to learn about the topic, they might not always see how the assignments that you're giving them connect to those things that they're trying to learn and why those assignments are valuable to them in achieving their goals. A third thing is accessible content. So this really just means making sure that every student has the greatest possibility to engage with the assignment and complete the assignment to the best of their ability. So something that can be really helpful, especially for students who may not have the same preparation as other students, is scaffolding. If you can help build up to a big assignment with multiple smaller ones, that can be really helpful for students who are just learning. It's also important to give explicit instructions and try not to assume what students might already know. For example, if you assign a research paper and you expect that students should talk to a librarian or talk to yourself about the topic before they start writing the paper, making that explicit is really important. It also helps for students who may not know or might not be comfortable reaching out to you. Whenever the instructions are vague or unclear, the students who feel more comfortable reaching out to the professor to get clarification will have an advantage of the students who don't know how or aren't comfortable doing so. And then the third thing is trying to provide examples that are equally familiar to all of the students. This can be challenging when you have a diverse group of students who have different life experiences and different frames of reference for things. So it can be helpful to kind of mix up your examples, at least if you can't find one that's going to be equally familiar to everybody. For example, I never learned a lot about different sports. I kind of know the big picture ideas for each one, but the rules are kind of blurry to me. But a lot of professors that I had would use examples from sports, and those would kind of go over my head for the most part. So if you can try to mix up your examples, or maybe give context, if you are going to provide an example that's a little more specific, just give the context so that all students can understand those examples. That is going to help make your class more inclusive. And finally, rhetorical intertextuality. I did not know what this meant before last semester when I joined a learning community that was led by Liz from the library. And really what this is about is just teaching students to use sources. So students don't always come in with as much knowledge about the purpose and ways to use sources as we might expect. So just saying, use MLA format and don't plagiarize is kind of the extent of what some people do. And for some students that might be fine and they know what to do, and others that that might not be enough. And really for all students, they probably don't have a full grasp yet of what the purpose of sources are or how to use them. For example, when do you provide a quote versus when do you paraphrase, and how do you do those things correctly? Most students or many students will often see the purpose of sources as they're writing their paper, they make a claim, and now they need a source to back up that claim. So they already know what they're looking for. They go into the literature and they try to find a source to back up the claim, that the argument that they're trying to make. If we can, try to involve students more in seeing the purpose of sources is more of joining a conversation, right? Maybe reading the literature first, understanding the state of the field, and then they can join that conversation, make their own contribution, and then they can cite the people who influenced their thinking along the way, or who have made other contributions in that area. We're going to dig a little bit more into what Hobbs and Robinson call utility value. What this really is just providing assignments that have personal or professional meaning to the students. I was really influenced in this area by the book Creating Wicked Students by Paul Hanstedt. So a lot of these ideas that I'm going to share come from there. So something that's really great about providing assignments that have meaning to the students is that you can tap more into intrinsic motivation, and instead of students just trying to complete the assignment, do the bare minimum to get the grade that they're trying to get, they really care about the topic, and so they're more likely to put more time and effort into it and really try to understand it. Another way that you can infuse some meaning into your assignments is to give students some authentic problems from your field. This might be challenging, especially when the problems are, not yet solved by experts. How can students be expected to attack those? But really, giving them those problems can help them feel more interest and personal meaning, because they're real problems that they get to help try and solve. And even if they can't solve the problem, maybe they can solve a tiny piece of it, or at least learn how to approach those kinds of problems and the different considerations that people make. In addition to giving students personal value, it can really also, I've found, help students understand what working in that field might be like, and the kinds of day-to-day problems that those people in that field will be approaching, and how to do the actual work. Something that can stem from this as well is developing students' sense of authority. If they're approaching a real problem in the field, or something that has a personal value to them that they spent a lot of time working on and researching, it can help students develop a feeling that they know what they're talking about, that maybe they're not an expert in the field yet, but they're working towards that, and they at least have some sort of angle that they can speak to a problem that maybe no one else can, or many others can't. So a way to do this is, instead of having students do a research paper, perhaps just reframe it as a proposal, and really the meat of the assignment can stay the same, but if you're giving students just a little bit more room to personalize it and to think about how to think about a topic in a new way to generate something new. There can be a lot of benefits that come from that. So all of these things, when you're trying to make your assignments more meaningful to your students, it requires getting to know your students and the kinds of things they care about. And this is, when you have a diverse group or a large class, this can be a challenge, but it's well worth it, even if you can just get some trends to help tailor the class to their interests, and or you can just make things open-ended so that students can take an assignment and run with it in a direction that they find interesting. Another thing I wanted to talk about is universal design for learning. This can be a great way to make your assignments more inclusive. So there are kind of three facets to universal design for learning. First is using multiple methods of motivating learners. Not every student might be motivated in the same way. So if you can provide a few different angles for that, it can be really helpful. Another is providing materials in multiple formats. So perhaps you have students who do really well with readings, but there are other students who maybe would do better with audiobooks or podcasts or even a video that really might help them process the material better. And another is to give learners multiple ways to show what they know. Maybe you have some students who could really do well on the type of assignment that you generally tend to assign, but then there might be others who have different ways of showing what they know. And if something's a little more open-ended and allows for some more creativity, you could be really surprised at how they can show what they've learned. So kind of a good analogy for thinking about the universal design for learning, and a common one is the GPS analogy. So the idea is that there might be different destinations, right? The multiple methods of motivating learners, right? They might be all have different goals, trying to go different places. The route might differ, right? You could take route A or route B. That would be multiple methods for providing materials. And their starting point might be different, right? And so that doesn't mean that everyone needs to take the same path. As long as they all have a journey, right? They all go on that journey. That's what really matters. And so that could be another useful way to think about it. One thing about universal design for learning is that it can be a little bit overwhelming for people to think about. And when you're trying to provide lots of options, it can get challenging. And so just recognize that you don't have to do everything at once. A possible good way to approach universal design for learning is to just do one thing each time you teach the class. Add one additional choice, one additional format for a material, and then over time, you'll eventually have a class that's really accessible and that all learners can succeed in. So we've talked a lot about some big ideas. I wanted to give some example assignments before moving on. So one example assignment for how to incorporate all of these things is the essay. So this is an example. I wanted to give a kind of humanities focused example. So this is not something that I've done, but this was published by Kate Denial on her blog. So there's a link to that blog post in the slides. And so the way that this works is that she gives students two options for how to do their final project for the class. So first she says you can propose a project that draws on skills you've developed in and out of class that demonstrate what you've learned this term, and then gives some examples of how to do that. You'll also turn in a bibliography of sources used. So this really incorporates some of those things we talked about. So first of all, proposing a project. So it's a proposal rather than a research paper. Gives students some authority over what they're doing. It draws on skills you developed in and out of class. So the out of class piece recognizes that students have outside knowledge and outside skills that they could bring into the class, and that's welcomed and valued. And then they're demonstrating their learning in various ways. And something that Professor Denial talks about in her blog post is that she makes this the first option, right? This is kind of like considered it's the first one presented. It might be shown as like the default, right? And then the other choice is a research paper, right? Which maybe would more often be considered the default. But that is also an option that students can choose. They can choose to write a 8 to 10 page paper on the subject. And so that's also an option. But it's kind of opened up so students can make a choice here. They'll also do a proposal to make sure that the topic is something that that makes sense for the class. So another example, this is from a class that I teach. In this case, students are proposing a new synthesis, which is the goal of the class is to learn organic synthesis. And so we kind of lead up to this by doing a literature overview together where students learn about a area of research and the types of new synthesis projects that are being done in that area and how they might contribute to that. I give them some options to start with, but then they can also choose to propose their own thing. And so again, it's a proposal rather than a research paper. So they're coming up with something new. That means it has utility value because the students can make their own meaning and make decisions. They design their own projects and determine their own goals. There's also scaffolding in that we do a lot of work together on understanding the background. I also talk a lot about the literature and the types of research that's been done before and how sources are being used to kind of build in that rhetorical intertextuality where students see that there's a broad conversation happening and that their task is to add one small contribution to that larger topic. There's also the opportunity for cultural relevance as students can choose projects related to their own interests. For example, many students choose a project with an environmental focus because that's something of personal interest to them. Switching gears from assignments to assessments, there is a lot of overlap between those depending on what field you're in. But this would be more assessment considered like quizzes or tests, but really anything that you're using to assess student knowledge. So there's two different kinds. Formative assessment is gathering data that is meant to improve student learning. So it's thinking about what students have learned so far, what concepts are they not yet grasping. And summative assessment is gathering data that assesses what students have learned, what they know, usually at the conclusion of kind of a learning sequence. So it's their opportunity to demonstrate proficiency of the learning objectives of the course and that they're prepared to move on to the next level. Research studies show that having just a few high stakes summative assessments is not very inclusive generally, and that it's really helpful to include formative alongside summative assessment. So give students low to no stakes opportunities to practice demonstrating their knowledge and figure out what they don't know. Anytime you can build in some metacognition with this as well to help students understand what they've learned well, what they haven't yet learned well, and how they can better improve their learning process is really useful as well. So a good model for thinking about inclusive assessment is backward design. In backward design, you start from your learning objectives. So before you figure out anything else about the class. You sit down and think about what knowledge or skills do you want your students to have at the end of the course, and do you write those out as explicitly and carefully as you can. After that, you move to thinking about assessment. How will you know if students have achieved the learning objectives? And the focus here should really be on those learning objectives. You want to make sure that you're assessing the things that you care about and not things that may not be part of your learning objectives, but might also affect a student's ability to succeed on an assessment. So for example, memorization skills, English skills, speedy thinking, those sorts of things may or may not be part of your learning objectives, but many assessments can include them. So there might be times where, for example, like being able to perform an assessment quickly could be important in some fields, like for example, journalism, if you're trying to meet deadlines, that could be really important. But there are other fields where being able to sit down and complete a test in a short time period may not be something that you're necessarily trying to assess, but is going to be affected by the type of assessment that you choose. There's also evidence that multiple choice in particular can assess cultural or linguistic preparation more than actual content mastery, because the prompts for those tend to be very long and complex and kind of assess students' reading ability more than their actual understanding of the content. So that's a special one to keep an eye on. And it's only then after you've prepared your assessments that you move on to your teaching plan. And you think about what learning events, what kind of instruction are going to help prepare my students for those assessments that I've designed. Just to go a little bit more into the research on this, studies have shown that assessment can disadvantage students for being culturally different from the dominant group. So thinking about ways that might happen and trying to avoid it or mitigate it as much as possible. Another study found that students from non-dominant groups perform better in classes with criterion reference grading. So grading where students achieved grades based on their mastery of course learning objectives, than they did in classes with norm referenced grading, where students were evaluated in relationship to one another. So again, putting the emphasis on the learning objectives wherever you can, instead of having students like graded on a curve or things like that of that nature. So this brings me to a related topic, which is ungrading. I couldn't resist the opportunity to talk about it a little bit, but even if you are not interested in alternative assessment or ungrading, those other things that we talked about can be incorporated into any traditional type of assessment model. But if you are interested, so ungrading is a bit of a complex idea. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about what it is, then why it's inclusive, and then how to do it. So it's an umbrella term. It doesn't refer to one specific thing, but it can refer to many types of things. It's also not the absence of grades. So if you're in a context where you do not have to assign grades, there's really no need for ungrading. The reason for ungrading is to provide alternative assessments in a situation where you still have to provide a grade at the end of the course. Ungrading increases student agency in some way, generally, and puts focus on instructor feedback, not on sorting or ranking students. Additionally, ungrading can apply to a whole course or just one assignment. So if it's something you're interested in, but you don't want to necessarily ungrade your entire class, you could just try it out with a single assignment first and see how it goes and whether you like it. A little bit about why ungrading is considered an inclusive pedagogy. So as you'll see, it has a strong focus on learning outcomes and second chances or ways to resubmit assignments. So that means that even if you come into the class with educational debt or are not as prepared as some other students, it's possible to catch up if you kind of tank that first exam, it's not necessarily going to hold you back in terms of your final grade. Ungrading is considered an emancipatory pedagogy. It is founded on the notion that education should play a fundamental role in creating a just and democratic society. It increases equity by transforming our classrooms into participatory democracies. Really just means that the power balance is a little bit more distributed through dialogic evaluation practices. So assessment involves a dialogue between the student and faculty member and gives the student a little bit more agency. So there are many, many ways of ungrading. I'm just going to talk about three really common ones right now. So first of all, mastery grading is one method. In mastery grading, most things are kind of graded on kind of a pass-fail scale where a assignment or a learning objective might be considered mastered or not yet mastered based on a percentage. It's generally rather high to indicate mastery, and what exactly that percentage is would be determined by the instructor based on the norms in their field. Some fields might require more accuracy, right, like engineering or nursing compared to others. Then if work is not yet mastered, students continue to turn in revised work until it reaches mastery. In this case, grades are neither reward or punishment. They're simply a message about where the learner is at a point in time along that path to mastery. Mastery learning tends to work well in courses that are focused on skills building. Another kind of ungrading is contract or labor-based grading. So in this style, students may sign a contract stating what they must achieve to earn their desired course grade. Even if they don't sign a contract, it's very clear from the beginning what kind of work will be necessary in order to achieve a certain grade. Grades then are based on labor rather than quality. So higher grades are the result of extra work that is intended to deepen learning. This rewards student effort rather than student incoming knowledge, and it encourages risk taking where students aren't necessarily just trying to maybe write a paper that is what they think the professor wants to hear, but instead writes a paper that is most of interest to them. So this is often used in writing courses, especially first-year writing courses. A third model is collaborative grading. So in this type of ungrading, the instructor provides feedback only, generally, rather than a numerical score on any assignment or assessment. Students will then complete self-assessments, which often include reflection and metacognition. Students then meet with the instructor as needed to discuss their progress, and final grades are determined by a consensus between student and instructor. This is a model that I've used, and one of the things I really appreciate about it is that I think it prepares students for the next step in their careers where they often will be completing self-assessments, and it can help them have an idea of how to think about their work and how to advocate for themselves and get some practice with that before their first job and their first annual review. So just to conclude, I'll review what some of the main things we talked about. First of all, cultural relevance. If there's a way that you can incorporate students' prior knowledge and lived experience into the classes, that will help make them more inclusive and help students feel valued in the class. Utility value. If your assignments can provide some sort of personal or professional to the value beyond a grade, and communicating that to the students, that can be a really inclusive strategy. Accessible content. So this could include the principles of universal design for learning, making sure that every student has the ability to succeed to the best of their ability in your class. And giving students choices can also be a great way to do that. And backward design. So including formative alongside summative evaluations when possible, and making sure that your assessment method is aligned with your goals and values. I hope you enjoyed this recording, and I appreciate your time to listen. Thank you.